Your laziness is a gift. Everything that has improved the human condition, it came from laziness. I don't want to do that. Let's find a better way. The reality is that if you test it, working hard is not getting results. Working smart gets results.
I wanted to give you the opportunity and to explore your thinking around the difference between animal proteins versus plant proteins. In your opinion, the literature that you've seen, the experiences that you've had, which do you think, if there is one, is superior and why?
Plant-based protein is nonsense. There, I'm done. No, I'm kidding. Here's what's going on. Plant-based protein is an ultra-processed product. It has to be because it comes packaged with enormous amounts of carbohydrates. If you're going to get plant-based protein by eating beans and rice, you're going to get hundreds of grams of carbs, and the amount of those you'd have to eat in order to get protein sufficiency is unreasonable, and you would look like Buddha if you did that with the large belly.
With the belly, yeah.
That's just what happens. So what else is going on there? Oh, are there enzyme inhibitors in plant-based proteins? Yes. Why are they there? See, plants don't want us to eat, especially their babies. And going back as far back as a dozen years ago, when I published the Bulletproof Diet, which people are still using, people have lost a couple million pounds on it. First chapter, I talk about that, and I talk about phytate and how it's sucking minerals out of the body, but having trypsin in there, or trypsin inhibitors, means that you just simply can't digest the protein. Most plant proteins are not there to be food. Plant proteins are there as building blocks or as even defense chemicals, like lectins. Lectins are not in plants because they help the plants grow. They're there in those plants because they help the plant avoid predation. So when you go through and you say, oh, I'm just going to eat all this plant-based protein, why was it in the plant and what did it come with? What you end up realizing is that that's weird. I could do an ultra processed thing. When we're talking a lot of steps to get all this stuff out, you can take, moldy broccoli or corn, and you can throw in acid and process it into textured vegetable protein and get something that comes out pretty much straight MSG, but you make it 74% MSG, so you don't have to label it that way, and people eat it and they're like, this is so good, I have to have more. And then you get hypoglycemia from it. What we've done with petroleum is you can take petroleum and torture it until it becomes a pharmaceutical. You can take any kind of plant and torture it enough until it becomes some sort of chemical thing, and then you can call it a plant-based food. Whether or not it has protein in it doesn't matter, because we could talk about sarin, the nerve gas. That is a plant-based protein from jack beans. It'll kill you instantly. You could use China study logic and say, therefore, all plant-based proteins will kill you and you should never touch one, which would be nonsense. You could also say, well, snake venom will kill you, therefore don't eat any animal protein. So let's stop worrying about plant versus animal and worry about what it does. The lowest level, you can look at proteins as an assembly of amino acids. For listeners, I know that you know this, Stephanie, but for listeners, you can look at, these are the letters that you would use to assemble into words that you assemble into proteins. So if an amino acid is the lowest level unit, it's a letter. You stick those together and you have a word. That's a peptide. And you stick a bunch of peptides together, you have a sentence or a paragraph, and that's a protein. And then you add in some nominal amounts of carbohydrate and minerals and structure and all this stuff, and then you get a steak. So when people say that plant-based proteins are the same as animal-based proteins, they're ignoring all the inhibitors, they're ignoring phytate, but more importantly, they're ignoring the fact that protein isn't just amino acids assembled. Protein is actually, it's a sentence. It's an instruction to your body. So you have to look at, what do the peptides, the dipeptides, the tripeptides, the polypeptides, what signaling effect do those have on the body? Oh, it looks like plants don't make any of those. So if protein's a signaling molecule, animal-based protein does something different than plant-based protein, irrespective of the amino acid profile and the toxin profile, which is inferior for plant-based proteins. Any decent biochemist can take a bunch of plants, torture them until they deliver enough amino acids. Oh, hold on, I have to use the right language. You could torture the plant carcasses until there, I've triggered all of your vegan followers.
Oh no! For the 2 vegans that were still listening, they've just shut
exactly.
You off. Yeah.
But I mean, you can take plants, you can do whatever you want to the plants, and you can get amino acids and put the amino acids out there and say there's a complete amino acid formula. Your body will absorb those amino acids, and you have things like perfect aminos that do that. And that doesn't do the same thing as eating collagen protein. And I'm the guy who made collagen $1 billion industry category. And the reason collagen works is because the di and tripeptides in collagen signal the body to do things that the individual amino acids don't. So a collagen tripeptide, that just means like there's 3 amino acids stuck together. It does something different than just taking glycine and proline. So what's going on here is that the big food industry used to tell us a calorie is a calorie. So that was an excuse to sell you corn syrup. Now they've realized if they can tell you a protein is a protein, it's an excuse to sell you gluten, which is a plant-based protein, and to tell you it's healthy. There are paleo cookies made out of gluten because they're high protein. It doesn't matter if something is high protein or something is high calorie. What is it made of? And protein is not a granular enough thing to tell you what's going on in there. That's my perspective on it.
I appreciate your perspective because I think it is a bit more of a vitalistic or a holistic viewpoint versus more of the mechanistic studies that we see in the literature. And the reason why I wanted to start with this, and I was mentioning this to you in the preamble before we got going, was there was a study Brad Schoenfield had posted maybe a week or 2 ago at the time of this recording anyway. And there were 2 groups. Both had some weight training experience. One was exclusively fed animal proteins, the other exclusively fed plant proteins. And at the end of 10 weeks, which you can argue 10 weeks is not a long time for looking at muscle hypertrophy, they essentially found no significant difference between the 2. Now, you had individuals like Simon Hill, who I've actually been having I slid into his DMs, you can say, because he commented on, I actually had Ben Bickman on my show a couple weeks ago, and he said the same thing that you did, that
I like Ben. He's good.
Yeah, he's great. Like animal proteins, based on his review of the literature, are superior to plant proteins. And Simon had commented on that post on Instagram, and I said, Simon, come on the show. Like, please explain your position, because I want to understand how you can train 2 groups. Now, I think that there's also a huge confounding variable in that both groups got creatine, which is a very abundant, like, when you look at animal-based protein, it's very abundant in creatine. Creatine is very
hold
abundant.
on a second. Stephanie, you can't do that. You have to be very isolated. The fact that you got all these other things in meat that weren't protein, you have to ignore those to make any argument that they're similar. Because you got creatine in the meat, you got all the minerals in the meat that were bound to look at it from an amino acid perspective is putting on blinders. Right. And I think that's where you're going with it. But yeah, thank you for saying that. Creatine would change everything.
It would change everything, because creatine is not abundantly found. I mean, I know it's found in sort of smaller amounts, but not abundantly found in plant products. So I think that they need to redo the study. But you had the Simon Hills, let's say, saying, see, you can choose whatever protein you want and it doesn't matter. And it sort of had my head in a spin. I was like, am I wrong on this? Like, I really have to look and speak. So I wanted to ask you about it because it is top of my mind in terms of what I'm currently trying to dig through and sort through.
Let's put it this way. You are made out of animal protein. You are not made out of plant protein. And your body does take what you bring in and use it both as a fuel source and as a source of building blocks. What's packaged with meat is a ton of minerals, all the signaling molecules that come in meat that don't come in plant proteins, and things like creatine. So if you were to want to build a red meat cell, which is what your cells are, you would want all of the things, all of the little cofactors, all of the things we may not have even identified yet. Some odd chain fatty acid that's in a cell membrane. There are things like that. Your body is going to use all of that. And your body is not going to use corn protein the same way. And that's actually a very important point. We don't know everything about the body, not by a long shot. And we're knowing more and more every day. And AI is letting us look at outcomes. So in computer hacking, which is my background before I started the biohacking movement, it's about a black box, which means I don't know what's in there, but I'm going to change it. So you test what the inputs are and you test what the outputs are, and you don't have to know how everything works. But in academic science and the kind of stuff that you'll see guys like Brad and some of the more angry, strident calorie or protein, like low carb, like there's just this like endless swirl of anger in some of that stuff online. What you find is they're not looking at the holistic black box view of humans at all. They're saying it has to be this because I know everything about the pathways. Dude, you do not know everything about pathways. I don't care about what your PhDs are. It's a system. And we don't know how to predict weather very well yet. That's a system too. And your body is more like weather than it is like a meat robot. So when you put meat into a meat robot, if we were all the same, it wouldn't work. But your protein needs are different than mine. You might do better on chicken than red meat or something. So what I think you can say, though, is that all of the cofactors that come with animal protein, including dairy protein, they are so necessary for life that if you take someone and you say, well, I'm going to strip everything out and just give you amino acids, you probably will do just fine for a little while. And over time, you will get old and weak and you won't have the zinc or the copper, or you'll have the form of copper you can't absorb, or you got trypsin, or even looking at plant-based proteins, IgGs are important when you get those in proteins. In fact, if I was forced to eat plant protein as a source of protein, I would choose defatted hemp protein because of its IgG content. So that's what I guide my vegan followers. And actually, I have a surprising number of them, even though I tease them mercilessly. It's not done out of like hate or anything. It's like, hey, I was a raw vegan for a long time, and until it made me really sick. So I'm like, you're not going to get your minerals. You're not going to get your IgGs. You're not going to get the things that make thriving humans from plant protein. It is peasant food.
It is peasant food. Yeah, well, I mean, this is part of the conversation that you're having in your new book, Smarter, Not Harder. You're talking about the animal versus plant proteins. We're talking about, and there's
it's only one chapter.
It's one of many.
Smarter, Not Harder is the book.
Smarter, Not Harder. And you talk about, and I think this maybe is a good sort of door opening, if you will, to go into some of the foods that we do find, or even some of the compounds that slow us down. Because the whole premise of the book is that we are, and maybe I'll let you explain this a little bit better than I can, but this idea that our bodies are inherently, there's a through line of laziness, that we don't want to work harder. We want to work, we're going to always put in the minimum effective dose to sort of stay alive and not get killed. So maybe speak a little bit about the through line of the book, and then we can maybe weed our way into lectins and phytic acid and oxalates.
Is it okay for me to trigger the bodybuilder community when I do this?
You sure can. Go for it.
Okay. I mean, they're, especially the vegan bodybuilder community, like, because there's 4 of those and they're just very loud, but there aren't very many of them because it doesn't work. There, I triggered some of them. All right, here's, sorry guys, if you're listening, I have fun with you all the time. What's going on inside Smarter, Not Harder is I looked at the history of exercise, and there's only 2 things we've ever done. One of them is you run away from tigers, or you could run after them if you're hunting them. And the other one is you pick up rocks. And then a while ago, someone said, what if we concentrate the rocks into iron plates? And that's what we do. And there's been a few little innovations since then, but most people still believe, especially like the people who are starving all the time because they're counting calories and think that it's calories in, calories out still. They're like, if I just work hard enough, I'll get results. So I believe this once too. When I weighed 300 pounds, I went to the gym for 702 hours. I did 90 minutes a day, 6 days a week for 18 months. I went on a low fat, low calorie diet. I was actually vegetarian for a portion of that time. At the end of that time, I still had a 46-inch waist and I still weighed 300 pounds and I could max out all but 2 of the machines at the gym. So clearly I wasn't working hard enough, according to the logic that we all think about. So I wrote Smarter, Not Harder, kind of to get even with that, because here's how it really works. You've got to pick a goal, and then you've got to get a signal into the body to create change. We believe, because our bodies are inherently lazy, that the way to get results is to overcome the laziness through force. And it turns out that's the hard way. there is a smarter way. That's why it's called smarter, not harder. And by the way, this really pisses off people who spend an hour a day in the gym because it's part of their self-identity. It's like I've attacked their mother. Guys, I'm not attacking your mother. I'm trying to give you an hour a day back and the muscles you have now, because that would be worth it. And then maybe you could do something like meditate or some kind of therapy for the chronic anger you've generated by undernourishing and overtraining, because that's called cortisol. And that's why the online forums, in large part, when you get into these calorie counting things, they're a cesspool of anger and trauma and body image issues for men.
Worst neighborhood on the planet.
Yeah, I don't hang out there anymore.
Yeah.
There's no point to it. And there's not a lot of self-inquiry there. So smarter, not harder. I'm like, okay, I opened a facility 8 years ago underneath Arnold Schwarzenegger's office, the first biohacking facility on the planet. And it spawned a movement. It's part of biohacking, but there's lots of little mom and pop places thinking that, okay, what if we have this technology that just works better than picking up iron? I like weightlifting. I have no problems with it. I just don't have time for it a lot of the time. So I'm like, okay, what's going to give me muscles in the least possible amount of time? So if your goal, there's 5 goals from Upgrade Labs that people come in with. There's some of them I want muscle. Some of them I want to get my energy back, and I want to lose some weight. Those usually go together. If you have extra weight, you have less energy. And then some people say, I really wanted I want my cardio back. I'd like that to work. Some people want their brain to work again. And some people just want to manage stress better. In fact, more people are asking for stress management than weight loss for the first time in history. Thank you, government, for all the stupid stuff you've done over the last couple of years. So you got to pick a goal. And then there's a chapter in Smarter, Not Harder for each of those goals. So you can go in and say, all right, I want to put muscle on. There's ways to do it. But cardio is maybe one of the best examples. People who lift a lot generally don't like cardio, and they do it because maybe it's going to lose fat or something. I think that's the myth. I don't think cardio is particularly good for that. There's many, many other ways to do it. But what you can do is you can send a signal into the body. Just like we said, different proteins are different signals. Well, a short 20-second sprint at full speed, like you're going to die, followed by deep breathing and meditation. You do 2 of those over the course of 5 minutes. Do that 3 times a week. You'll get a 12% improvement in your VO2 max, which is a really good improvement. If you were to do an hour of spin class every day, burn more calories to earn more potato chips, that kind of a thing, that's going to get you a 2% improvement. So 15 minutes a week versus 5 hours a week. 15 minutes gives you 6 times more VO2 max. This should be impossible because we all know that more time on the treadmill, working harder, is what gets results. This is proof. And there's 2 studies from the University of Colorado about this. We use that tech inside Upgrade Labs, and I'm opening dozens of these franchises across the country. And I compare that to the $400 million of ghost gym memberships where people never go. They spend that every year because the gym doesn't work very well. And you can get people who have such body image things, or maybe they were bullied and they just never felt safe. So they're finally going to have enough muscle to be safe, or whatever is going on in there, where like their identity is that. And I hate to tell you, you might want to identify as someone who's nice or kind or helping your community or constantly improving. Yes, going to the gym is important. Yes, having physical fitness so you can show up in your brain, in your life. But if you spend 12 hours a week doing that, you're not meditating. You're not parenting. You're not doing something that might matter more. So the idea behind Smarter, Not Harder is, look, for any of these 5 goals, whether you want a better brain, whether you want a better butt, it doesn't matter. There is a technology or a technique or knowledge that causes that to happen faster in less time. So the muscle technologies in there get 3 to 5 times faster than picking up plates under the force of gravity. The cardio is at least 6 times better, not even counting on a per minute basis. And then you look at the brain stuff. What do you do to make your brain better? And the idea here is you are a hard worker because of your brain. That part of your brain that wants to work hard, if it's given the tools, it can do 10 times as much. But instead, what we do is we believe that hard work is the key. The reason we believe that is that there's what I call the meat operating system in the book. And your meat operating system has 1/3 of a second to do something before you get to see it. And it's the thing that makes the couch look really sexy and it makes the gym look really unattractive. So you know consciously that the gym is better, and then you're frustrated and you feel actually like a failure because your body's telling you that the gym is bad. Dude, your body's not dumb. This algorithm of spend less energy in case you run out, that's kept every animal alive for 2 billion years. It's intrinsic to you. Your laziness is a gift. Your laziness is why we have cars instead of walking everywhere. Your laziness is why everything that has improved the human condition, it came from laziness. I don't want to do that. Let's find a better way. Smart Not Hard is just adding on to that. Hey, I don't want to go to the gym. I'm willing to do it if I have to. I don't have to. Or if I do, I'm going to go to Upgrade Labs, or I'm going to use the technology that's in the book, and I'm going to get it done in less time, which means I can do something I enjoy more. And people don't like that sometimes. But that's the idea behind it. None of us has enough time to do all the stuff we're supposed to do. It's because your body's lazy, and there's ways to even motivate yourself with that.
And I think that for so many people, I hear this all the time, that health often feels so overwhelming. Like, where am I supposed to start? Is it the weights? Is it the cardio? Is it the meditation? Am I supposed to be a better parent and read this book and that book? And listen, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll I have my nice nails on this side, but if you look here, I have like these battery acid from all the weights that I'm lifting, all of these, roughenings that have happened over time from lifting heavy weights. So I'm all about it. And in the book, you talk about some of the AI controlled exercise machines. And I wanted to just double click on that for a moment, because
Sure.
it was so interesting to me, because the idea around this is that you're overcoming your proprioceptors, or your proprioception, which is essentially your sixth sense or your unconscious sense. Can you talk a little bit about how these machines are able to supersede our proprioception?
Yeah. So some people, when they hear sixth sense, they're thinking more of like energetic intuition and things like that. It's not that sixth sense. It's the idea that your body has its own consciousness and it knows where it is in space. So if you're going to go catch a baseball, your hand has a dumb little but very fast consciousness that kind of knows where it is, so you can reach up and grab it, but you're not doing it with your conscious thought. You're not doing it all with the brain. You're doing it where basically the brain imagines you catching the ball, and then the hand's like, oh, I got this. And then the hand goes and does it. So there's a distributed intelligence throughout the body. It's actually very elegant and kind of scary, because it means that your hand has its own consciousness. Each cell has its own consciousness, but as you get smaller and smaller, the dumber and dumber they are, but they're all very fast. So there's a system that's not in your brain that's controlling, say, when you're doing a bench press, right? You're doing that and it's monitoring your shoulders. So your shoulders have their own little consciousness, this proprioception and some other stuff in there. And they're saying, how much can I lift? And you're pushing, but then because you're pushing against gravity, gravity accelerates at 9.8 meters per second squared, which means when you wobble a little bit, the bar is heavier. Now, your proprioceptors feel the wobble and they go, oh man, I can't lift anymore because the wobble might be a big wobble and then I would get injured. And my job as a shoulder is to not be injured, irrespective of whoever's in the brain. It doesn't know and it doesn't care that you're in there. All it knows is its job is to not be injured. Its job is not to push as much as possible. And the whole mental side of weightlifting is the mind over the body. You're going to push, you're going to do it. Well, what if instead of using effort and willpower to do that, you change the inputs to the proprioceptors? Since they're expecting gravity and they're very well adapted to telling you exactly how much you can't push because it might wobble, you could sit down on the AI machine at Upgrade Labs, which is integrated with all the other tech that we do, and you can push, but you're pushing against something that will never wobble because there is no gravity. You're pushing against a computer-controlled winch. And when that happens, if you wobble or if you fail a little bit, instead of the weight falling back towards you, it just keeps moving. It's almost like an isometric exercise. And when you do that, you put muscles on really, really quickly because you're able to load the muscle far beyond what you could do with a normal bar. As an example, right when I was first opening Upgrade Labs about 8 years ago, I did a belt squat with 1,600 pounds. I saw your eyebrows go up, right?
Wow.
You can't do that with gravity because you would destroy your legs. As it is, I had like a pair of Oakley combat boots on and they were forever useless. Like literally the soles flattened out, right? But so does this mean I'm more powerful than anyone else? No, it means I could do 1,600 pounds without gravity because I didn't have to worry about wobbling. Because if you have 1,600 pounds and you shake a little bit, it's going to weigh 3,200 pounds and you're going to go to the hospital. Right. Yes, I was sore for a week, but the idea here is you can do it. I even invited Mark Bell, who's one of the top 5 powerlifters in the world and just a really cool guy. He came up to my prototype lab on Vancouver Island when I still lived there. And I put him on the machine. And after 5, I don't remember how much weight he did. It was insane. But 5 of these things, he's like, what did you just do to my chest? Like, what the heck? Right? Because you can load the body differently. And when you load it quickly and then relax, that's when the change happens. And this is the other thing that's missing from the conversation. And this is a new concept. I think you'll like this one too. It's in Smarter Not Harder. And I call it slope of the curve biology. And it's something I've been noticing over time. We went from spin classes to high intensity interval training. And from there in the book, I talk about rehit, which is even lower intensity, but works better. If you do 3 20-second intervals, it works worse than 2 20-second intervals. You have to get the right amount. What drives change in the body is a very sudden onset stressor, followed by a very sudden turning off of the stress. So if you can return to normal breathing, normal heart rate, and a peaceful state, the body will change quickly. So what you must do is load the body when it has full access to minerals, from animal proteins, and proteins, from animal proteins. So you load the body quickly, and as soon as you're done, you stop and you just chill. And Frank Zane is one of the guys who inspired me on this. This is a Mr. Olympia, first generation bodybuilder guy. I interviewed him a couple of years ago on my show, and he plays the flute and he spends 2 hours a day meditating. And his whole career of bodybuilding wasn't just lifting stuff. It was lifting stuff and then relaxing. When the body feels safe after it had a signal, safety plus nutrients equals growth and transformation and evolution. And lack of nutrients or overtraining, or even just training for a long period of time and then going to work right away, you don't get the benefits. So it turns out speed up of the input and speed off of the input, that's what drives growth, not the duration of the work, not how hard it was, how quick it was. So with this knowledge, you can change your brain. You can change your stress response. You can change your cardio. You can change almost anything in the body. And slope of the curve biology holds true for everything I can find except for zone 2 cardio, which I don't do because it takes 90 minutes a week and I have a life. But I recognize it would probably be good to do it. I just don't care that much.
I like to pretend that my weights are zone 2 cardio. I mean, I don't know if that's, I like to pretend, at least that's what I tell myself. Well, I love that because particularly coming back to the weights for a minute, there is sort of an upper limit. Like whenever you're thinking about progressive overload or progressing in the gym, let's say, you can't continually add weights to infinity. At some point you have to change volume, you have to change set number, there's all of these different things where you are starting to see time creep up in the gym. And while I very much enjoy it, I would also be very interested in finding an upgrade labs if there is. I don't think there is one in Toronto, Canada yet.
I'm talking to several people about that. You can go to ownandupgradelabs.com and open one. It's a franchise. We're opening dozens of them across the US and Canada. So Toronto's definitely on the list. In fact, the last guy I talked to there was talking about doing 9 of them there, but we haven't closed that yet. So you should open one.
All right. Well, maybe we'll have a conversation after the podcast, but I love that because when you do allow for, when you can go beyond, let's say, the proprioceptors, like as you were mentioning before, they are directly wired into the nervous system. So you wobble, as you were saying, you're going to get a stretch. Like if you overstretch, these are proprioception is sort of built into the myotendinous junction, Golgi tendon organs and spindles and whatnot. That gets up to your brain. Like if you wobble a little bit, as you were mentioning, those afferents up to the brain are like 40 meters a second, something crazy like that, like 40, 60 meters a second. It's already in the brain and there's a descending, like shut this down, like rebound. And then that's where the injury, you may be able to finish the set, but then afterwards you're like, oh man, like that was a weird one. Right. And then you're out of the gym for however many weeks. So I do think
I've done that so many times when I used to lift heavy. Yeah.
yeah. And then the cardio is also really interesting. So I used to be the way that I actually paid for my chiropractic school was being a fitness instructor. So I was like the step queen and high low and Tai Bo and all that.
Do you have like
stuff.
a leotard and leg warmers?
I didn't. No, it was after that, but it wasn't that much longer after the leotards and the bright pinks and all the things. But what you're talking about, and you talk about this in the book, so I wanted you to just expand on it a little bit, is this rapid glycogen depletion. So when you have that slope under the curve, you were talking about like very, very quick stimuli. Talk a little bit about what happens in the body when we rapidly deplete glycogen.
Well, you store glycogen in two parts of the body. You store it in your liver and you store it in your muscles. And I'm assuming some of your listeners may not know what glycogen is. So it's the way your body stores sugar. And for each molecule of it or each gram of it, more accurately, you have a couple grams of water. So one of the reasons if you have some carbs after workout, you get like, you see more volume in your muscle, you're storing water. It also looks like you get swole, and it also looks like muffin top too, because that swole goes everywhere. Mm-hmm. So when you go on a keto diet, you lose about 7 pounds in the first week. That's just the water that was stored with the carbs that your body doesn't have anymore. So any diet that says you could lose 7 pounds in a week, probably is cutting carbs, because you can do that. But a diet like my rapid fat loss protocol, I had a guy lose 75 pounds in 75 days. That wasn't water. That was fat and some swelling and inflammation in water. So what's interesting here with glycogen is that you can deplete it from your muscles by using your muscles, and you can deplete it from your liver in part by using your muscles, but your brain relies on the liver more than the muscles. So you will dump glycogen from the liver, but at night, for instance, if you can put glycogen into the liver and not the muscles, it'll help you better with sleep than having lots of glycogen stored in your muscles. Raw honey is interesting because raw honey will go to the liver preferentially over the muscles, whereas other forms of carbs like starches or sugars will go into the muscles and liver equally. So that's one of the sleep hacks I wrote about years ago that's now like in everyone's list of sleep hacks magically, which is raw honey before bedtime for those who need it because they wake up between 3 and 5 a.m. with racing thoughts and lots of cortisol and adrenaline from a blood sugar stop. So we'll take that glycogen out of the conversation, but it's important to know about. We'll say, okay, you have glycogen in your muscle. If you rapidly deplete it, instead of flipping around the pink dumbbells, although there is a way to use pink dumbbells and still deplete that. We'll talk about that later if you want. But if you're doing the normal pink dumbbell thing, well, you're not going to deplete glycogen and you're not going to get the physiological changes that come. And then what I found in Smarter, Not Harder is that if you rapidly deplete it and then you relax so your heart rate comes back down, that's when you get the most gains.
So it's the pause. It's the
pause. Whether we're talking about muscles or in the case of cardio, you can do with cardio too. That's a sprint versus a jog. So you can do a sprint with a pink dumbbell, or you can get on the treadmill and do the thing, or you could just get serious about it and say, with the AI-driven system that we're using at Upgrade Labs, you deplete glycogen as rapidly as you can. You can't do it on a normal treadmill or bike because you can't turn it up all the way fast enough. There is no ramp up.
Right.
So at a park, you could put on a weighted vest and like go for a really, really slow walk for a minute just to get kind of warmed up. Not a jog, just slower than you want. I described like you ate 2 THC edibles. You're kind of just meandering and then just run with a 45-pound weight vest on. Run as fast as you can for 20 seconds like you're going to die. And then flop down on your back and do deep breathing exercises to relax and bring your heart rate down as soon as you can. 4 seconds in, 8 seconds out. Now, someone's going to try and give you CPR or call an ambulance, unfortunately, in a park because you're going to look pretty weird. But that is the algorithm for rapid glycogen depletion and then returning to baseline. What this mimics is what animals do in the wild. If you ever see like a lion or a tiger chase a deer in National Geographic, whatever the flavor of deer is in Africa, I forget the names. But what they do is if they get away, they literally stop, shake. That's the adrenaline just getting dumped from the system, and they eat grass and they're fine. And if we mimic that in our workout, we're strong and lean. And if instead like, oh, something's hunting me for a whole hour because I did a sprint and then I ran at 50%, then I sprinted, then I ran at 50%. The body's like, I'm not going to adapt. Are you kidding me? I can't get away from the tiger. He keeps chasing me. So all the energy that would have gone into just quickly upgrading the system, I had enough protein, I had enough minerals, I had the right fatty acids. I'm just going to fix that. That's rapid change versus I'll fix it a little bit, but man, every time it happens, I almost never get away from the tiger. I barely make it. I run until I'm about to die because working hard is what makes you strong. It just doesn't. That's not what the body likes.
What is the frequency for that are you recommending? Because I know women that are 6 times a week. They're going to, they're on the Peloton, they're at Orange Theory, F45, whatever it is. They're doing it 4, 5, 6, 7 times a week.
Okay. I'm going to have to talk about something. This is a human behavior, and it's a distributed, or it's a distributed system phenomena. And so I studied this. I used to build internet stuff like cloud computing things, and I studied AI in my undergrad. And there's something called a system equilibrium. And there are points in a system where it's stable. It'll rest there unless you do something to take it out of equilibrium. And one of the things in economic systems that's really scary is that the equilibrium where you make the most money is this business model. You tell people that your product solves a problem when it causes the problem. Diet soda, it makes you fat. But since it's diet soda, if it makes you fat, you're going to keep buying it all the time, the way I did when I was 300 pounds. Right? So you make way more money. But if I had diet soda that worked, after 6 weeks of drinking it, I wouldn't want to drink it anymore and I'd make less money. So is it possible that the gym industry has done the same thing? Not consciously. There's no evil overlord like Fauci trying to tell you have to go to the gym 6 times a week because it'll make you tired and a little bit puffy because your cortisol's too high and your hormones will be off and you'll be constantly struggling. No, they don't tell you that. But imagine if you just went to the gym once a week and it worked and you had your energy and you had your cardio and you had your focus and you liked how you looked in the mirror. Would you do that? Okay, my bet is that we're smart enough to do that. That's my bet on Upgrade Labs. By the way, my bet on Bulletproof was that people were smart enough to spend more on a protein bar with real protein, grass-fed collagen protein and MCT oil instead of canola oil. It's a $100 million plus company today. So I just believe in humans. I believe we're smart. I believe we don't like to waste our time. We don't like to waste our energy. And we get pissed when we're deceived, even if it's by a system. So take the drugs that cause enough side effects to need more drugs, highly profitable. Drink the diet soda that makes you fat, so you'll drink more diet soda, highly profitable. Go to the gym 6 times a week and pay for each session. And you're always struggling, it doesn't work. Oh, let's give you some kale and wonder why it never works, which means you maximize your spend. It's not evil causing this. It's just this fundamental belief that if I work hard, I'll get results. The reality is that if you test it, working hard is not getting results. Working smart gets results. Working hard burns you out. And unless you're getting results, you're going to be running as hard as you can. The psychology behind that is really interesting. You want to go into that?
Yeah, I was going to say there's a really huge intersection here with psychology and what our cultural, we've been talking about working harder and like the shame and the guilt. Like yes, go there.
You would know this better than most because you were a fitness instructor, right? Okay. I mentioned earlier that our bodies are lazy and they're set that way. Just eat more, use less energy in case there's a famine. Like this is what's killed all kinds of life for 2 billion years. Since our system that's faster wants to do that, we've developed all of these coping mechanisms as the humans who sit inside our meat operating system. And one of them is we build habits. Well, since I know my body's lazy, I can do a habit, which means I don't have to think about it. So we do habits that create overtraining. Like I'm going to wake up every morning and do 75 hard. I'm like, good God, you want to overtrain and like make yourself.
That's a twice a day freaking program, by the way. It's like twice a day for 75 days.
It's just unkind.
Yeah.
And by the time you're done with that, you're going to be so overtrained and worked out and probably injured.
Yeah.
And if you're a woman, your cycle's going to be off. If you're a guy, you may not have a kickstand in the morning. So that is not good for you, but you will probably lose weight unless you have a dysfunctional metabolism like I did. I would have just wrecked myself and not lost weight on that when I was younger. So habit is one thing. And then we use shame. Your coaches in high school, your teachers, your parents, your churches. Don't be lazy. The early bird catches the worm. So the very idea that we might be lazy, we actually have this huge like PTSD about it, like this shame. Dude, newsflash, your meat is lazy. Your body doesn't want to do it. And your body controls how you see the world. it gets to pick what you can see. You don't see the third of a second delay between when I clap my hands. It's instant, except I can show you with the electricity. I run a neuroscience clinic. We know what your brain does, and it takes about a third of a second before the brain gets a signal that there is sound, even though the body already knew. And Stephanie, you and I don't see the little dime-sized blind spot in the middle of each eye. No, our body edits it out of our awareness, and it edits out how good exercise is for you, and it edits out how bad the couch is for you. And that way your feelings about this are that you should do one thing. And if you feel a desire for the couch or a desire to not go to the gym, instead of saying, oh, that's just my body doing its thing, we go, oh man, I'm such a bad person. I wish I just wanted to go to the gym. I should want to go to the gym. And all these judgments, all these shame and things like that. So I'm just going to tell you, that's normal and healthy. Of course you don't want to go to the gym. You also don't want to plow the field using just a hoe. And it's okay to use a tractor to plow the field. And that's actually a lot better. Why would you not use a tractor to go to the gym? Because we have a religious belief and a shame-based belief that working harder gets us results. And I prove it over and over and over in Smarter Not Harder that working hard does not get you results. It gets you tired. What I want you to do is take your ability to work hard and use tools. And now you can do 10 hard things while working hard. Is my life an example of that? I don't know. I have 8 companies. I built a $100 million company. I have 300 and something million downloads on my podcast, and Smarter Not Harder will be my 5th New York Times bestseller. It's because I'm lazier than fuck, Stephanie. It's not because I'm smart. It's not because I'm good. It's because I'm so lazy. And I want the tools to allow hard workers like you and me to actually be lazy so that every ounce of hard work actually builds a muscle, actually gives you VO2 max. And all the other hard work you didn't waste in the gym, you can waste on parenting, on meditation, on anything that matters. That's why I'm kind of passionate about this, if you can't tell.
Yeah. I mean, what you're really describing is like exponential growth, right? If you can really minimize the input, but maximize the output and then compound that over time, you know, the output is the 8 companies, the 100 mil in revenue, the impact, you know, that you're trying to affect on the world.
And 8% body fat in 15 minutes a week. And I'm never hungry. Oh, and I laugh at plant-based proteins, just to be really clear. Sure, I've tried it. It doesn't work on plant-based proteins. You want to be always hungry? Eat plant-based proteins. I am not hungry anymore. I eat a ribeye every day.
All right. So let's come back in the book to, you mentioned plant-based proteins. I want to continue to dive into some of the areas in the book that you talk about, foods that slow us down. So I've had a couple of people on the show talk about, say, lectins, phytic acid, oxalates. I would love for us to talk about this as well. One of the things that I took up in the pandemic, never did it before, was sourdough bread. But I will say that, I import my wheat. So I go to the Little Italy and then I buy the flour that they bring in from Italy. And I always find that whenever I make that sourdough bread, I don't have any, we'll politely call it GI distress, right? So no distension, no kind of trouble metabolizing it.
No food babies.
No food babies. Exactly. Talk to us a little bit about phytic acid, where it's found, and then how we can circumvent it if we still, let's say, insist on consuming things like grains and nuts and seeds.
Chapter 1 of the Bulletproof Diet a dozen years ago talked about oxalates, lectins, phytic acid, omega-6 fats, and histamines in food. And since that time, there's been books written about each of those, and those are becoming parts of biohacking parts of the world. And I just wanted to shine a light on those, but I feel like I didn't do a great job on phytic acid, because you will feel a lectin, because at least I do. I'm sensitive to nightshades. So when I eat even a little bit of it, I get skin issues, and then I have joint pain, like especially upper back pain for quite a while. It's just not worth it, even though I love spicy food. So you'll also feel oxalates once you know what you're feeling. You eat that raw spinach, you get weird gritty stuff on the back of your teeth, and the next morning your low back hurts when you wake up, and you don't know that's what it is, but you feel it. Phytic acid is something that you don't feel right away. What it does is it sticks to minerals in your food, including even animal proteins. If you eat phytic acid from plants with animal proteins, you won't get the minerals. It'll even strip minerals out of your cells and out of your bones. And it's such a problem that even in animals that can handle phytic acid, like cows and sheep, and I say this as a farmer of regenerative agriculture farm, or sheep and pigs and cows and chickens, when farmers use grains or corn that contain phytic acid or oats, they actually measure the levels of phytic acid, because even animals that can digest phytic acid, they hit a limit. And as soon as they do, they start getting weak bones, their hooves start falling off, and bad things happen. So what is phytic acid doing? It's a plant defense compound that makes sure you don't get the minerals from the plants. And when you eat it, it weakens you. This is beautiful from the plant's perspective. Like, hey, you might eat some of me, but if you eat too much of me, you're going to die. Right? And that's a pretty healthy equilibrium in nature. So some plants are meant to be eaten by some species. And I'll tell you, the ones with phytic acid aren't meant to be eaten by humans because we don't make phytase, which breaks down phytic acid. There's a loophole to that. Humans can make a very small amount of it if we eat a very high phytic acid diet, but we don't make nearly enough. And we turn off our production unless we're eating just masses of oatmeal all the time or something. And then you're still always depleted. So when I was a vegan, I believed this thing that, okay, I'm getting all these minerals in my plants. The presence of the mineral equals absorption of the mineral. And that's bullshit. The presence of the mineral means nothing. That's like saying, oh, I'm going to have sex, I'll get pregnant. I'm just going to ignore the fact there was a condom in the way. Okay. Like that would block it, right? Well, you can look at phytic acid as a condom for plant minerals. It is not going to get into your cells. So you could strip off the condom.
I think we have the new T-shirt, by the way. I think that's the T-shirt. Phytic acid is. I
just made that up, but It's really funny. I wish I would have thought to put that in the book, because I would have. Darn. And it's really funny because visually, it just drives me crazy. Even the aggregate nutrient density index, the Andy people, who are saying, well, you should have something that has no calories and tons of minerals and other nutrients, then it's good for you. They don't notice if there's also a shovelful of cyanide and arsenic, because, well, those weren't calories. We didn't care. So what I'm looking at with all this stuff is I want you to be healthy and I want you to feel good. And it's just really important to understand that phytic acid comes from whole foods, like whole grains. It comes from nuts and it comes from seeds. The paleo crowd, which I set out to disrupt with the whole bulletproof approach, was let's eat less of those and let's do cyclical keto with clean fats instead of just eating tons of nuts and seeds all the time. What you will do if you eat nuts and seeds, even if you're eating a ribeye and some liver every day, is you just won't absorb them. So you could sprout them, which helps. You could take a phytase enzyme, which does help. But your best bet is to do what you did with sourdough. Number one, you get European wheat, which is, at least up until now, not sprayed with glyphosate. Glyphosate is a mineral chelator like phytic acid. It will stick to the minerals in wheat and stop you and stop the wheat from using the minerals. The reason American wheat is not edible anymore is that about 2 weeks before harvest, they spray the entire crop with glyphosate to kill the plants. And it does that by binding minerals. The plants, since they're dying, they put a last burst of energy into their babies for the next generation. And then the wheat ripens a little bit more quickly. And now you have wheat covered in mineral chelating glyphosate, which is one of the 4 or 5 ways it harms humans. And then you eat that and it wrecks your gut and it wrecks your fascia by sticking into the glycine receptor in the body. So what I think you want to do is look at, okay, you want to eat something that's delicious. Yes, sourdough is a good way to do it. What you would do if you wanted to be the most effective, by the way, you don't need this, but if you just like grains, rye has a lot less phytic acid than wheat. So you would get European rye and you would ferment it, because fermentation will also break down phytic acid. And I talk about this. It's only one chapter where I talk about phytates and minerals and stuff in Smarter Not Harder. You won't get benefits from a workout. You won't get benefits from meditation. You don't get benefits from working hard if you don't have the minerals to make the enzymes that allow the body to fold proteins and make ATP. So I just want people to be mineral sufficient. In fact, the other thing we haven't talked about, assuming, okay, sourdough rye is your winner if you're going to do it, followed by sourdough wheat, but not whole wheat, because the fiber in the outside of the grain isn't worth it, given that it's packaged with all of the anti-nutrients. So use white flour and make sourdough and make sure it's European flour, and that's your best source of grain-based carbs. Although not as good as white rice because there's no gluten in there.
Yeah, I love
so
I
white
love
rice,
white
you
rice.
can do something similar.
I also find, and this is an observation. I know you touch on milk in the book as well. I don't typically have milk products. I have sheep milk. There's a place that I'll go and get sheep milk in Toronto. There's one shop that I have to go across town to get my sheep milk. But when I'm in Europe and I have, let's say, a gelato or something like that, it's probably in Italy. I don't have the same, we'll call it, what did you call them? Food babies, the GI distress that I have here. So I don't consume ice cream here. I don't consume dairy here because I find it very aggravating. My cappuccinos are made with sheep milk. Like whenever I have a cappuccino,
If I could get fresh sheep milk, I would do that. I don't react to sheep's milk. In fact, in my hierarchy of milks, sheep milk is second only to camel milk in terms of compatibility with humans.
Milk. Yeah.
So like sheep milk is,
milk.
So camel's best, then sheep is the next best, then goat comes after that. And then after that is raw A2 cow dairy. And then after that is like the very worst of all, which is A1 grain and corn and soy fed industrial milk. That's just really not that good for you.
Right.
But who knows? In fact, I do know there are ways you can process industrial milk, just like you can process plants. If you can make a plant protein out of beans, even though it's not going to be very good for you, you can also take milk and process it to make almost anything you want out of it. And there are good sub-fractions of milk that won't necessarily piss off your body.
And is it more important to avoid the cow's milk, like the A1 cows, let's say? I know that there are some farms. I have a farm share where the farm will send me vegetables and fruits every couple of weeks. Sometimes you can also buy parts of a cow because unpasteurized milk, at least in Ontario at the time of this recording, is still technically illegal, but you can own part of the cow. And therefore, if you have ownership in the cow, that's sort of the loophole to allow you to.
That's okay. Just as someone who lived in Canada for 12 years, no one actually listens to the government in Canada anymore. They lost their legitimacy. There's actually no leadership in Canada right now at all.
Yes,
like
agreed.
There's people who pretend like they're governor because they're governing or something, but they're not. So people just ignore them and just drive their trucks wherever they want. It's actually kind of laughable because Canadians are so polite. That they just politely ignore the people in power, and they have their grass-fed milk. It's the same thing on Vancouver Island, same thing in British Columbia. The entire country buys grass-fed milk. It just ignores the government politely. Thank you, Canada.
Thank you, Canada. Yes.
Yes, do that.
Yes.
And while you're at it, eat the cow after you drink the milk. You'll be fine.
Absolutely. Let's touch on oxalates and lectins. I had Dr. Gundry on the show who wrote a book on lectins, very likely inspired from your work as well, from the Bulletproof.
He's a good friend. I'm sure I helped to put it in our consciousness. He's also like a leader in robotic surgery. The guy's an absolute stud. And for a cardiothoracic surgeon to start talking about lectins, wow. Like that takes a huge set of balls. So I have a lot of respect for Dr. Gundry. And yeah, he did write a whole book on lectins. And yes, maybe I inspired it, maybe I didn't, I don't know. But I think I made a mistake when I said, look, there's these 5 things in plants that are messing with you. You have to figure out which ones are your problem. So like, Stephanie, you may be able to eat a bowl of raw spinach every other day. I don't think it's good for you, but it probably doesn't give you pain the way it gives me pain. And so like oxalates, which is what that comes from, or from kale, that is one part of it. And you need to know, is oxalate a problem for you? And what would you do about it if it was? And then for other people, where I would say I disagree with Dr. Gundry a little bit, is that not all lectins are bad. Your body makes 1,000 different kinds of lectin every day. It just as a normal part. All they are is proteins that stick to sugars. It's just there are certain kinds of proteins that stick to certain kinds of sugars that you may make genetically. I make the kind of sugar on my cartilage that exactly attaches to the nightshade type of lectin, the things you'd find in deadly belladonna or an eggplant or potatoes. Like I would love to eat potatoes. They're a great source of starch if you're not lectin sensitive. My daughter eats potatoes. My son and I don't, because when we eat them, our necks hurt and our knees hurt, and life is not nearly as good when you're in pain all the time. So lectins aren't bad. The lectins that make you weak are bad, and you got to sort through all of them, but I don't think eliminating all of them permanently is the solution.
And even when you pressure cook them, because I remember, for example, my grandmother would, whenever she would prepare, let's say lentils or chickpeas, she would either soak them, or there would be this like silver thing that she would put on this pressure cooker that she would have on the stove, that she would cook them or pressure cook them and then prepare them the way that she wanted to.
You can, for some lectins, use heat and pressure to break them down, but not all of them. So you can throw a jalapeno in there with those beans and pressure cook it. Those lectins are going to be just fine, right? Because they're different proteins. So some proteins, actually every protein will denature. In other words, it'll fold or unfold at a certain pressure and heat point. And if you look even at something like quinoa, quinoa is peasant food in Peru. I've been there a couple of times. Unfortunately, now it's not peasant food anymore because basically hippie vegans in the US are stealing all of it from the locals. It's a subsistence crop. And now it's all getting sold by big multinationals. And they're like, I guess they'll eat more corn. But when they would cook it, they would ferment it for several days, or you have to pressure cook it. And you go to these ridiculous, restaurants, the kind I used to go to, and they just boil a little bit of quinoa like it's rice and throw it on there. And, the next day you're just farting up a storm and like, what is going on here? Well, you got a big lectin dose because the food wasn't prepared properly. How many restaurants pressure cook their beans? They don't care if you fart when you're done eating.
Right. They just want you to pay the bill. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I would just say, if you're going to eat those inferior quality subsistence foods that are there to get us through the dark winter until we can catch an animal, you can do it, but don't tell yourself that it's the healthiest thing you can do. You have to take out a whole bunch of toxins to even make it edible. Whereas if you just took a big old bite of cow, there's no toxins to take out. It's almost like eating less toxic food is better for humans. I mean, I know it's radical to say.
Fancy that.
Sorry, vegans.
Yeah. And there was a big part in the book where you were talking about minerals. And so,
yeah.
Yeah. What would you like people to know about minerals?
I felt kind of bad writing that part of the book. So I'm always attracted to like nootropics, and I've formulated a bunch of advanced things for mitochondrial function and all that. But it's the least sexy, least interesting part of the world of nutrients. But so many people now are deficient in minerals, in part because we've stripped our soil because of glyphosate, and because we're eating a lot more of these whole foods that we were convinced were healthy. So we're now mineral depleted. And the whole point behind Smarter Not Harder is that, look, I just want you to do the minimum thing that's going to get you the results. If you don't have two important factors in your body, you won't get results. Even if you work out, you'll get some, but you won't get as much as you should. And one of them is just good old fashioned macro minerals. It takes 3 capsules to get enough minerals every day. And I talk about how important that is. So you got to get your minerals. You also have to get trace and ultra trace minerals. And that's why my new coffee brand is called Danger Coffee. You can go to dangercoffee.com, and Danger Coffee has a very high dose of trace minerals in it. So that when you drink your coffee, you're getting your minerals. Enough to overcome, are you guys ready for this? There is a small amount of phytic acid, very small, but there is some in coffee.
No.
So it's no. Like we can tolerate a small amount of it. You just don't want a lot of it.
And even if there was a lot, I'm still not giving up coffee. Like I'm going to find the coffee that I can drink. Yeah.
I would take 2 pounds of phytase, the enzyme, with a cup of coffee if I had to get my coffee. I'm with you.
Yeah.
So I just want people to know when you're getting your trace minerals, everything in your body works better. And so when you drink a cup of Danger Coffee, you're getting electrolytes and more than 50 trace minerals. And that's important because you're not getting that in your diet anymore. So if you get your minerals in, you're still not done yet. And this is the other problem with plant-based proteins. There's something called vitamin Dake, and you can go to vitamindake, DAKE.com, and I'll show you how I do it. But vitamin Dake is a combination of animal-based fat-soluble vitamins. And the reason that I write about like the least sexy thing is vitamin D, like when I started blogging a dozen years ago, vitamin D awareness was a big thing. And I shared so much about it. Everyone knows, even through the pandemic, when they tried to tell us it didn't work, everyone knows vitamin D has all kinds of good effects on the body.
You could get kicked off of Instagram for saying that 2 years ago, for saying vitamin D is an important cofactor for the immune system. That was a very radical statement.
It was weird because we've been saying it for like 10 years before that without it being a problem. It's almost like there was censorship, but I mean, that would be wrong. So of course we couldn't have had censorship.
Impossible.
Just don't ask Elon in the Twitter files, right?
Right.
So anyhow, vitamin Dake, you will not put minerals into your cells unless you have enough vitamin D and vitamin A and vitamin K and vitamin E. Vitamin E is available from plants and animals. It's the only one. You can get like gamma tocotrienols and things like that. So I put them all into a pill, and it costs about $20 a month. So you get like 60 days supply, and it's under $40. But vitamindake.com, I talk about, here's how you get it. If you have minerals and you have vitamin Dake, that will put the minerals into the right place in the right cells, and then you'll have cells that can respond to the environment at full power. And I wanted to write about all the sexy stuff. And yeah, I wrote about like herbs for sex and sleep and all that in the book. It's a small amount. This is a book about like what to do to get a specific result. And it's in 5 big things. It's not about sleep or sex. Those aren't the big 5. Those are side effects of getting your muscles working, side effects of helping your stress response or helping your brain or whatever. But I just feel like none of the biohacks are worth doing. None of the expensive anti-aging supplements, even things like NAD that I'm a fan of, unless you've got your macro minerals and your trace minerals and your vitamin Dake, it doesn't work very well. So get those up first. If you only have $20 a month, it's vitamin Dake. If you have, $40 a month plus trace minerals, and you should do that before you go to Pizza Hut. You really should. It'll pay off in a way you can't even imagine.
Yeah. And it has so many far reaching, you talk about magnesium in the book, you talk about sodium and potassium, copper. And in my experience, even people who live in Austin, in Florida, you can be vitamin D deficient. Like we've done, it doesn't matter. It does matter that you're able to get sunshine, but even in, people who live in Miami, let's say, or Tampa, I've seen labs where their vitamin D levels are not sufficient. So either they need more sunshine or they need to supplement with vitamin D as well.
I think you always find that in labs, maybe always, just 99% of the time. So I went a while ago, I said, I'm going to test this. I went to Hawaii for 6 weeks and I got 4 hours of sunshine a day. I actually got skin damage from the sun. So my arms are not as nice as they were before. But I mean, I got a nice dark tan. I don't wear sunglasses anyway. I've been one of the early guys talking about, how you need sunshine, including UVB in your eyes. And I did this and I measured my vitamin D levels and I was at like 35. And I want to be at 70 to 90.
Right.
And I was just like, this doesn't work. And this was, how many people can spend 4 hours a day in just swim shorts outside with sunshine? Now, you live in Toronto. I lived in BC.
Yeah.
And when you're in Miami or where I am in Austin now, there's actually sunshine, but I'm indoors under studio lighting right now. And so are you. So it is a fool's errand to get your sunshine from only Mother Nature, because you will spend all day outside and it still likely won't work. And you will get sun damage if you get that much sun. So what do? We take vitamin D and then we use real sunshine to activate the vitamin D. But if you only take vitamin D, you'll drive tissue calcification, which you don't want. You get calcified arteries. It's still better to have just vitamin D, but if you were to pair it with vitamin K2, that's going to keep that problem from happening. And if you take vitamin A with it, vitamin A helps to keep zinc and iodine in cells. And then you take vitamin E, which works, at least if it's the right form, as an antioxidant to improve mitochondrial function and also has a mineral binding effect. This is like the recipe that allows minerals to go where they're supposed to be. And then you turn on the recipe, you bake the recipe in the sun. It takes 20 minutes of sunshine on most of your skin to sulfate the vitamin D. So you make vitamin D sulfate out of it. And if you're in Canada, which lots of your listeners are, I imagine, you're going to need a UVB tanning lamp. That's what I had. So when I was up there during winter, I'd spend 5 minutes in front of that light and that would activate that stuff. It's like having a little toaster oven for your vitamin D.
And I would also say magnesium is also important too, particularly. So I know that in the book, you didn't necessarily delineate between men and women, because I think a lot of the principles in the book actually apply equally to men and women. But in the past you have, when we had you on for your fasting book.
I always mention when there's major differences, but I don't think the instant on, instant off principle, it's not different for men and women, but training volumes are different. And magnesium are you finding that women need more magnesium all the time, or
Cyclically?
just during certain types of the cycle?
Yeah, certain times in the cycle for sure. So typically like a nice baseline is like maybe 400, 500 milligrams, and then up to a gram if they can tolerate it in their luteal phase, like in the second half of their cycle, because the body is just sort of preferentially throwing things like magnesium and selenium and zinc and all the things into the endometrial lining. I do like more mineral supplementation typically in the luteal phase than in the follicular phase.
Well, let me ask you this, and this is why I didn't write about that. It is that if you're consistently at high mineral supplementation enough to support all the phases, including the phases where you have the heaviest mineral demand, then during the times when you're not putting your biological energy into building uterine lining, you'd put it into building muscles. So it feels like backing off on magnesium isn't a good idea ever. As long, like, you should take as much as you can tolerate, and you should always be on that if you're a woman.
I would generally agree with that. So it's usually we want to be taking magnesium up to tolerance. So someone's saying, okay, so now I'm starting to get like loose stools, or I'm getting distension, or cramping, and then we would up it usually as a sort of prophylactic in the luteal phase. So I usually increase it in the luteal phase, but then in that follicular phase, it's like as much as you can possibly tolerate, and a bare minimum, like I said, 400 to 500 mgs, and then if we can get higher, then we do higher.
There's one part of the book where I did go into like really meaningful differences for women and men around minerals. And it's around iron and copper. So women have a much higher chance of having anemia because you have a monthly cycle. And a lot of times they're even getting iron infusions. But what's really lacking, especially in mainstream medicine, is an understanding of copper. For instance, if your copper is sufficient, which is hard to do, you'll need less magnesium. So that 400 milligrams might be your max if you have enough copper. And if you're deficient in copper, you might need a gram of magnesium. And even more interestingly, a lot of times anemia is caused because you don't have enough copper to use the iron. So you didn't need more iron, you needed copper to be able to turn on your ability to use the iron. So there are tons of women, and this is part of the minerals part of the book, where copper, you can have copper toxicity, but if you're copper deficient, nothing's going to work right. Like, it's a very, very fundamental metal used in all sorts of enzyme processes in the body.
Yeah.
So I talk about ways to get
zinc,
copper.
like if you're taking zinc that uses the same sort of ion channel as well, you have to be very careful about, copper and zinc together. They use the same sort of transporter. So we have to be making sure that you're balancing that out.
Do you have any friends who got gray hair during the pandemic?
Everyone?
Yeah. Now, we like to tell ourselves that it was stress, right?
I would assume so. I think a lot of people were very stressed out during that time.
I don't think that's why, because people do get gray hair from stress. It's one of the causes, but one of the major causes is copper deficiency. What supplement brand didn't add zinc to everything? So if you were taking your normal supplements and a few others, you were probably getting 50, maybe even 70 milligrams of zinc, which is way too much. And high zinc intake without high copper intake will absolutely, in studies, deplete copper. So we created a wave of copper deficiency, and copper is required for collagen synthesis. So if you got gray hair and crepey skin during the pandemic, yes, you should blame the government and replace it. But you also might want to back off on zinc a little bit and increase your copper.
Yeah.
And
like
see if you can maybe turn those hairs brown again.
Like 50 megs of zinc is like you take that acutely. If maybe you suspect you're getting ill, you sort of take it 1 or 2 or 3 days, and
it's insane.
Yeah.
It'll also drop your blood sugar when you take that much of it. So you can get hypoglycemia from it. And I'm a fan of zinc. Most people are zinc deficient, at least they were before the pandemic. And then given that there's all these weird studies that say zinc and vitamin D reduce all viral infections. And we talked about those, we whispered about them when no one was watching. Mm-hmm. So I just think a lot of this is caused by copper. Or it's caused by lack of copper. So when you read the one chapter on how to use minerals so that you have the raw ingredients for the biohacks in the book to work, I talk about that, and especially for women, it's about the copper. I'm a fan of copper orotate, but if you wanted to really maximize absorption, you take it away from the other things. And probably the most effective and most expensive form of copper now is copper niacin, where it's bound to a copper molecule, a brand called Mitosynergy makes that. And that works exceptionally well to help get copper back in, especially for women. Works for men too. But I think that if you're having anemia issues right away, you need to get on copper, and you might be amazed at how it wasn't an iron deficiency at all.
I want to shift a little bit just in the time that we have left. Towards the end of the book, really appreciated the smarter, not harder approach to forgiveness and spirituality. And I know that it's a bit of maybe a hard left, maybe not, from minerals and exercise and cardio, but it really is, when you think about the verticals of health, it's, physical health, chemical health, and emotional and spiritual health. And I really loved, and it was very obvious, a lot of the work that you've done, 40 years of Zen, certainly, and your process around forgiveness. And I wondered if you might walk us through a couple of concepts around what it means to be smarter, not harder, to work smarter, not harder in the context of emotional health, forgiveness,
Sure.
Releasing anger, and fear.
The reason that smarter, not harder is in the order it is that if you can fix your cells so they work better, all of the physical changes are easier. And when you get your energy back, you get your physical changes back, and you have that energy in your brain, you're going to sit there and go, why am I so anxious right now? And the anxiety, maybe it used to come from being mineral deficient. That'll cause anxiety. And then you'll blame someone around you for the fact that you feel anxiety, even though it's just maybe too many beans, right? Like, this actually happens. And if you don't believe me, just look at vegans who eat a lot of beans. Just saying, a lot of anxiety there. So I believe that much of that comes from mineral deficiency. But let's say that you've addressed that and like, my body's working right. What's next? Well, what's next is you got to work on yourself. So this is the next level up from the meat operating system. Now you're like, okay, why am I getting triggered all the time? And if you're getting triggered all the time, you got to ask yourself, what's in your gun? Like, what are you loaded with? Because if someone can trigger you, you are walking around with explosives inside of you. And if you really care about the smarter, not harder thing, why would you go to the biological and electrical expense of carrying around a whole bunch of triggers that don't serve you? It's like turning on every notification on your phone. You can't use your phone because it's bing, bing, bing. For a lot of us, our nervous system is doing that. And we do it if our body is malnourished or overtrained or overstressed. We do it from emotional stress. And we oftentimes do it for no rational reason from our mind's perspective. But from your body's perspective, it is rational. Your body is constantly scanning for patterns that might be a threat, just like it's making the couch look really attractive. So you don't consciously tell your body what to do in order to find those threats. Some of it we just know. If it looks like a tiger or a snake, we just don't like snakes. And that's because our body, well, enough humans have died of those that we just have a revulsion for that. But what about that time you were bullied? And I find this insanely common, especially in MMA and in bodybuilders, right? And this is, I never felt safe when I was young. So now I'm going to have enough muscle. I'm going to be invincible. I can kill anyone in the room.
That's my armor.
Okay? That's just a stress response, right? Yeah. And it's different than saying, I'm going to build this body as like a sculpture, as a beautiful body because I love it and because it makes me feel good. And because every time I look this way, man, the vibe is so different, right? And you get to pick one of those vibes. One of them, you're moving towards something wonderful. And the other one is you're running away from something scary. What I'm suggesting in Smarter Not Harder, and this is based on having spent 5 days with 1,500 high-performing entrepreneurs and celebrities and pro athletes at 40 Years of Zen, my neuroscience clinic. I teach this process with lie detectors on the head. And there is a way to go in and turn off the notifications in the body so you don't waste the electricity on them anymore. And then you can have your focus the way you want. So let's go through an example of something like this. Let's say that let's say that I'm triggered. I'm not anymore, but I used to be, so I can still do this. Let's say that I'm triggered by, Alan Aragon or Brad Schoenfield and the way that they attack their opponents instead of being curious about science, right? And that's actually a form of bullying. So like these are things like EMDR could help those guys, right? But let's say I'm triggered by it. And so I see that and I just want to jump in and like spend the next 10 years of my life in online debates saying the same thing back and forth and asking for sources, which is pretty much what's going on in those communities. It's intellectual bullying, right? So let's say I'm triggered by that. I'm like, well, okay, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to run through the reset process that's in Smarter, Not Harder. And in the reset process, first thing you do is you recognize that you have a trigger and you're triggered. And then you sit down and you're meditating, or if you're with me, you're doing electrodes on your head. And you're like, what's the first time I felt that sensation in my body that I feel right now? And it'll probably be that time you were bullied in 5th grade and your little Johnny punched you in the face or made fun of you or whatever it is. Like, oh, that's kind of weird. So then instead of running the reset process from 40 Years of Zen on Alan or on Brad or in any of the other sort of like, I'm smart, and if you don't agree with what I say, you're dumb kind of crowd, then what you do is you say, all right, I'm going to forgive little Johnny because I feel the same way with these adult bullies as I did with the child bully. So I'm going to sit down, I'm going to tap into the sensation I had, and then I'm going to literally, in my mind's eye, I'm going to sit little Johnny down and I'm going to say, here's what you did to me. And here's how it made me feel. Here's the harm it caused. And I'm going to really feel that harm. You have to actually turn on the emotion of it. This is the hard part. This is why you can do it with a therapist, or you can do it at 40 Years of Zen, or even something like EMDR can work if you're not going to do neurofeedback. You can do this by yourself at home though, which is powerful. And once you've really felt it, like, man, that feels icky. Like, I felt powerless or I felt judged or whatever it was. Then you look at little Johnny in your mind's eye and you go, I wonder what his parents were doing to him. I wonder why he's that way. And you end up developing a little bit of compassion for them. And to do that, you have to find gratitude first. So what's the one good thing that came out of little Johnny bullying you? Right? Well, maybe you got tougher, whatever, you pick something, it doesn't matter what it is. But for the meat operating system to actually turn off a notification, and that's all a trigger is a notification. What we've got to do is we've got to find one thing we're grateful for. It can be tiny. Like, I'm grateful that little Johnny only broke 1 leg, not 2. You win. Okay, you got gratitude. Okay. And then you actually forgive. And forgiveness isn't, it was okay what you did. It isn't calling little Johnny and saying, I forgive you. Forgiveness is just turning off the trigger. And it's actually a sensation you feel in your chest. And when you're done with that, magically, Brad and Alan can't trigger you anymore because your trigger wasn't them. They were echoing the behavior of a bully from 5th grade. And this is the hack. The first time you felt some emotion is the time you actually experienced the setting of the notification in your meat operating system. So all I want you to do when you read Smarter Not Harder is to go through life with less wasted energy on everything you do. And if you're wasting all your energy on walking around feeling triggered all the time, well, that's not a very good job of being Smarter Not Harder. And I just didn't feel like it would be a complete book. Because if we turn on all of your ability to make electricity in your body and you get lean and you've got muscles and you have tons of spare time and you're walking around constantly traumatized, you'll just be a bigger dick. And I don't want a world full of bigger dicks. I want a world full of dangerous people. By the way, that's why it's called Danger Coffee, because who knows what you might do. The people who are full of danger are the people who are running at full power. They're unprogrammable. They're conscious, and they choose to be kind and nice to each other, even if they disagree. And we have a world full of people who are becoming kind of peaceful because they're just weak. They're malnourished. They're tired. They're beaten down. And I'm not going to stand for that. And I don't think you do either, Stephanie. So we're building a world full of dangerous people who choose to be nice to each other. But you probably shouldn't fuck around and find out with us either.
Right. I love that. And I think that if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I don't know where I get triggered. Where are you most self-righteous? Where in your life are you most self-righteous about? And that would be a really good place to start. So for, the individuals that you've mentioned, or, if you're online and you're like, God, I can't believe that this person like put this tweet out and now I'm offended, or whatever it is. I think that, that would be a good place to start. Yeah.
If you're offended instead of amused at that kind of behavior, then you've got a problem. And if you feel like you just have to answer it, you have a problem. The reality is that you can ignore anyone online, even if they come and they try and bother you. And I had to do a lot of this work, Stephanie. I was on the Rogan show 3 times, right? And companies that Joe owns were literally trying to steal my brand's name as well as my concepts. So Joe participated in character assassination for 18 months. I had 25,000 bullies coming to my social pages and just completely screwing things up. It was crazy. And I had to do this kind of work and just realize actually this was just straight up bullying behavior. I've seen that before.
Right. And I've said to you, we've had little conversations or little comments on Instagram. Like, I really, it's so apparent the work that you've done in terms of forgiveness, in terms of love, in terms of letting things go so that they are not in your meat operating system anymore. And you can sort of see what it is. You can see the situation for what it is. It's not little Johnny from grade 5 again. It's just, in this case, maybe someone stealing proprietary information and trying to call it their own, let's say.
That stuff happens a lot. And I mean, if I went through the list of all the stuff that's happened as a result of becoming a really successful and well-known entrepreneur, there's been a lot of garbage. But to be able to sit with that, I had to go through and do all the deep work. And that's one of the reasons I opened 40 Years of Zen, because having my own company that has neuroscience, and we have 7 patents on how to do this now. And it's like, you can make yourself more resilient than ever before. And ultimately, resilience comes from cells and minerals, and then a signal from the environment to be able to handle oxygen and food. And then it comes into nervous system regulation. And that's what we're talking about here. And that means becoming aware of your triggers and becoming, bulletproof. Or dangerous, whatever.
Yeah, or dangerous. I love that. What a perfect place to pause our conversation. This has been just a delight. Smarter, Not Harder is now available everywhere. So we can find it at Barnes & Noble, and we can find it at Amazon. And I've been making notes as we've been talking. Some of the websites, if you want to open up a franchise, we'll have that link in the show notes. vitamindake.com, anywhere else that you'd like to direct people.
Just go to daveasprey.com. There's lists of all the companies that I started that might be of interest. There's links to the book and all the special stuff for the book and all that. Or follow me on social and listen to the podcast, any of that kind of stuff. Just don't waste 1 minute of your time. Just only read the stuff you like.